Marvin Heemeyer built a tank. He built a tank, leveled a good portion of a previously quiet small town called Granby in the Rocky Mountains with it, then immediately gained a measure of fame because of it, and almost as immediately met an inglorious end. But here's how the story begins. Heemeyer's story, at least the interesting part, begins in Granby, a town in a high basin of the Rocky Mountains in northern Colorado. Fewer than 2,000 people live there now, and it was no bigger than that in June 2004, when Heemeyer bulldozed his way into history.
More like a tank.
Something is taking place in Granby.
Tourism is a draw in the area, though Granby is hardly the center of it. But Rocky Mountain National Park is less than 20 miles, Denver is less than 100 miles, 160 kilometers, to the south. During the 1990s, Marvin Heemeyer owned a small welding shop in town, where he made his living repairing mufflers. He'd purchased the land on which his shop was built in 1992. Over the years, he had agreed to sell the land to a concrete company to build a plant. The negotiations hadn't been easy, and he'd been having trouble agreeing with the company on a suitable price. Marvin Heemeyer had moved to a town outside of Granby in the fall of 1991 and was running a muffler shop he had opened in Granby years earlier. By all accounts, he was a wizard as a welder. He was, by his own account, on recordings that he made in the weeks before he embarked on his tankcapade, a successful business owner. He was happy, snowmobiling with his friends, hot tubbing at his cabin and working hard at his shop. But as any small business owner in any small town anywhere in America will tell you, the red tape can be a bear. And Granby had its share of red tape. Heemeyer found himself at odds with others in the community, both in government and outside of it, after buying some land at auction.
He was upset that a batch plant was built next to his muffler shop.
Then he tried to get an easement for a sewer line. Heemeyer wasn't willing to pay a good deal of money to tie into the existing sewer line, and the problems that caused with the town government bloomed into a multi-year disagreement. In 2001, the city approved the construction of a concrete plant, zoning the land next to Heemeyer's for use. Heemeyer was furious, as he'd used the land for the past 9 years as a shortcut between his home and his shop. He petitioned the city to have the property rezoned to prevent the construction of the plant, but he was rejected on multiple occasions. So, in early 2003, Marvin Heemeyer decided he had had enough. A few years earlier, he had purchased a bulldozer with the intention of using it to create an alternative route to his muffler shop. Now, however, it would serve a new purpose as his weapon of destruction, the KILLDOZER. Over the course of about a year and a half, Marvin Heemeyer customized his Komatsu D355A bulldozer for his rampage. He added armored plates, covering most of the cabin, engine, and parts of the tracks. He'd created the armor himself, using a concrete mix poured between sheets of steel. As the armor covered much of the cabin, a video camera was mounted on the exterior for visibility. Inside the makeshift cockpit were 2 monitors on which Heemeyer could observe his destruction.
The bulldozer went crazy.
But this plan wasn't put together by city engineers or construction workers.
There were also fans and an air conditioner to keep him cool.
Just received a 911 call reporting that there is an out-of-control bulldozer.
It's the brainchild of an angry man with a grudge against a lot of local people and businesses.
They can't tell who's driving it, but there is someone inside.
The man inside this armor-plated bulldozer is Marv Heemeyer.
He fashioned 3 gun ports and outfitted them with a .50 caliber rifle, a .308 semi-automatic, and a .22 long rifle. According to authorities, once he'd sealed himself inside the cockpit, it would have been impossible for him to have gotten out, and they don't believe he ever wanted to.
Heemeyer wrecks buildings and vehicles one after another. And he's ready to take on sheriff's deputies or anybody else who stands in his way.
June 4, 2004, he sealed himself inside his cockpit and set out for Granby. He drove the machine out of his shop through the wall, then plowed through the concrete plant, the town hall, a newspaper office, a former judge's widow's home, a hardware store, and other homes. Authorities later realized that every building that had been bulldozed had some connection to Heemeyer and his lengthy battle against the zoning committee. During the rampage, law enforcement tried to stop Heemeyer and his dozer with volleys of gunfire.
What type do you need? The biggest armor-piercing ammunition he has.
Inside is...
So we do have a dozer that's completely armored and it is carrying one building.
Nothing worked. Heemeyer, with powerful rifles mounted inside the tank, shot at police and at least one of his rival business owners. He aimed his guns at propane tanks and fired, apparently trying to set off a major explosion, with what could have been a great loss of life. He plowed down buildings with people still in them. Others gathered in the streets to watch the odd spectacle. For 2 hours and 7 minutes, Marvin Heemeyer and his KILLDOZER pummeled through the town, damaging 13 buildings and knocking out gas services to City Hall. Such a panic ensued that the governor considered authorizing the National Guard to attack with Apache helicopters and an anti-tank missile. The attacks were in place and, had Heemeyer not wedged himself in the basement of a store, they would have been carried out. As Marvin Heemeyer attempted to bulldoze Gamble's hardware store, he accidentally got the KILLDOZER stuck in the foundation. With the end clearly in sight, Heemeyer killed himself with a gunshot to the head in his cockpit, determined to avoid capture and leave the world on his own terms. The wrecking spree went on for some 90 minutes, but miraculously, despite the machine's made name and Heemeyer's best if ultimately inept efforts, no one was killed. No one, that is, except Heemeyer, who took his own life not long after his not-quite-lethal weapon bogged down in the middle of raising Gamble's hardware store. After hours of trying to get into the stalled-out dozer, police finally cut through a steel door and pulled out Heemeyer's body in the darkened morning hours of June 5th.
This is 9 News Saturday morning.
Officials in Grand County say the man who was behind the wheel in a bulldozer rampage is dead. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to 9 News Saturday morning. It's June 5th. I'm Cheryl Preheim.
And I'm Greg Moss. Thanks for joining us today. The sheriff in Granby says that Marvin Heemeyer was behind the wheel during a 90-minute rampage in that fortified bulldozer.
It started just after 3 o'clock on yesterday afternoon in the town of Granby. That's about 50 miles northwest of Denver. This is video from Sky 9. It shows where the armored bulldozer ended up stuck inside a warehouse-type building. In all, between 10 and 15 buildings were damaged or destroyed, including the town hall, the library, and the newspaper building. Fortunately, no one was hurt.
9 News reporter Chris Vanderveen is live in Granby this morning, and he joins us now. Chris, when did the SWAT team finally get inside that dozer?
Greg, it took a considerable amount of time. Early this morning at 2 a.m., they finally got in. Keep in mind, Jefferson County Bomb Squad first tried to get this thing open with small explosives at around 9:30. First time didn't work. Second time didn't work. The third time they used small explosives, they actually noticed what they thought was to be a door. They then used an acetylene torch to open up that door, and they finally got in to find Marvin Heemeyer inside. Now, this was a very long night, obviously, that followed a very chaotic day.
Heemeyer was 52 years old. Had they not meddled in my business, Heemeyer pronounced in his pre-rampage manifesto, this whole thing would have turned out completely different. Despite the nearly $7 million in property damage done to the town of Granby, not a single human besides Heemeyer was killed during the rampage. This is largely because a reverse 911 system was used to notify residents of the KILLDOZER so that they could get out of the way in time. After the dust settled, authorities searched Heemeyer's home and found notes and audio tapes that outlined his motivations.
So basically, had they not meddled in my business, this would have turned out, this whole thing would have turned out completely different. If they would have just left me alone, let me get on the water and sand, build the building, put the tenants in there, I could have had that rented out. I could have rented out the muffler shop. I could have sold the muffler shop. I could have subdivided that. Could have done a lot of things. But basically, what all this is going to prove when it's all over with, if it's ever all over with, which I doubt, it's going to prove, I hope it's going to prove to people that meddling in your neighbor's business is destructive for the most part.
Indeed, in the years after the rampage, Heemeyer became a controversial folk hero in certain circles, with some believing that he was a victim of a town government that didn't think twice about hurting a local business. On the other hand, some have pointed out that he initially agreed to sell his land, and more crucially, that he could have easily killed innocent people during his attack if they hadn't gotten out of the way in time. Perhaps the most revealing note that he left behind was this one: "I was always willing to be reasonable until I had to be unreasonable. Sometimes reasonable men must do unreasonable things."